do I pin myself, Barry, or do I go into?
No, I'll handle all that.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. And let's bow in. So welcome to the Buddhist Path of Awakening. Once again, this course, we're going through Trungpa Rinpoche's 3-volume collection of talks that he gave at the Vajradhatu seminaries that took place over a course of, is it 15 years, Michael? Do you remember?
About.
Yeah, okay, close enough.
Yeah.
And each Vajradhatu seminary was a 3-month program. The first month, Trungpa Rinpoche gave Hinayana teachings, the second month Mahayana, and the third Vajrayana. These have been digested into these 3 volumes of the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma, which actually is a pun from Trungpa Rinpoche's name. His name is the Ocean of Dharma. That's what Chogyam means, and Chogyam Trungpa. And Chogyam means Ocean of Dharma. So this is the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. And we are on the 2nd volume, the Mahayana. And we are on chapter, which is it? 32, Prajña. And we're going to finish this chapter tonight. This is a very profound subject, and one that each one of us will probably come back to again and again over the course of our career in Buddhism, as it were. The subject is Prajña. Let's start out actually, Joe, by just doing a little bit of meditation. So if you would take a good posture, it helps. And bring your mind right into this present moment, here and now. There's nothing in particular that you have to be doing. In fact, the less you're doing, the better. Just awareness, simple, already here. It's in this space. It is the space that we inhabit. Thoughts about things come and go. Am I doing it right? Do I understand what this is happening? All those. But meanwhile, we are in a constant and unstoppable state of cognition of one or more of the 5 objects of cognition, which are sights. As long as you've got your eyes open, you're seeing sights. Sounds, you have your ears open, you see or hear sounds from time to time, like these words. Bodily sensations, now that you notice them, wiping your nose, sitting on your chair, whatever it might be. Occasionally tastes and smells, often when we're having dinner, those are more prominent. And of course, mental events, objects of mind. But all of these things, these are the 6 knowables they're called, arise and pass away in this clear space of unstoppable knowingness that we're all inhabiting unstoppably right now. It just never stops. This clarity. It's clear, it's limpid, and it knows these objects. We get seduced into dreams, thoughts with content, and we might go off in a dream. We're having a fight with our mother in Schenectady, we're having whatever. And those dreams are always about an I, a hero or a heroine. They're like TV dramas. They're like the movies that we watch or the novels that we read. And the hero or the heroine is always having some kind of difficulty or else some kind of success, which may only be temporary. And so the hero or the heroine is always full of tension, these thoughts, these dreams that come and go and seduce us away. But then they end. And when they end, here we are, once again, You can't escape it. This is like the sky, and those dreams are like clouds that come and go. There are all kinds of metaphors for this. Milarepa, in his 100,000 songs, he says, if you're going to have the sky, well, you've got to have clouds, they come and go. And if you have a mountain, there are going to be goats on the mountain, they come and go. These are our thoughts, our dreams, which seduce us into these I-other dramas, full of tension, hope and fear, elation and suffering. And then they're gone. And what's left in its place is this clear awareness of any and all of the six knowables that happen to arise: sights, sounds, smells, tastes, bodily sensations, and mental events. 6 of them. But the awareness itself, this is the prajna, sometimes been translated into English as discriminating awareness, wisdom. And we're all sitting here having it happen unstoppably. We can go off into dream, and then we're back. The dreams are the clouds, and then the clouds dissipate, and here it is again, because it never departs. So, end of meditation. You don't have to end this ever. It's a constant return to this from dream. And the beauty of it is that you can't create it. It's already there. If you try and create it, then you're off in some other dream again about creation, creating something. But this clear, limpid awareness is what we are. What a joyful thing. We're discovering that we don't have to do anything except relax. Relax and relate with the six nobles. So he says, I'm going back a little bit into the material that Michael presented last week. He says, you see, the sword, Prajna is a sword. It cuts through, this clarity cuts through dream. And he says, having cut through, having destroyed those dreams, this and that, we begin to develop an appreciation of ourselves. This appreciation is based on the confidence that we can actually don't have to do anything, that it's already here, that we actually are Buddha, or put it another way, we have Buddha nature. In appreciation of ourselves, we replace that sense of cheapness, the cheapness of wanting something extra, with delight. Delight. The delight is in the delight of the beauty of this extraordinary world that we live in. Prajna, elegant and arrogant, begins to happen. Elegant and arrogant. It's elegant because it's so simple, and it's so full of appreciation of the immediacy and beauty of things as they arise now. And this is the appreciation of emptiness, of shunyata. Empty of what? Empty of confusion. Empty of the drama of this story that we think that we have to, that it's self-defining. This story is always a story about me thinking that I have to do something to make it right, better. He says, having cut through both sides, the I and the other, with the blade, we experience shunyata, the emptiness of these stories. The emptiness, and the stories are always about I and other. We find that we are without kuntak, or false conceptions, and we have been all along. So now we go into this week's elaboration of this, and he's talking about the three prajnas. The first prajna, which is mundane prajna, is shared by theists and non-theists alike, he says. And what it amounts to is the intelligence. You see, prajna is so intelligent. It's much smarter than thought. It sees things so clearly. And so when we have prajna, he says we begin to read and write and think properly because we're connected with the real world, not this world of imagination, which is fraught with fear and self-attack. And math and science, and we conduct ourselves in the ordinary world. We become masters of all of the normal arts. This is mundane prajna. Mundane prajna means that you become very smart at things like literature and mathematics and science, culture. Mundane prajna is ordinary education, arts, science, philosophy, philology he throws in. Philology has to do with understanding what words are. It will help you help others with the Buddha Dharma. And then even your table manners are part of mundane prajna. You dress, speak, and write and behave much more beautifully and properly. And he emphasized this very much. And then when we, back in the late 70s and 80s, when we began to bring in the Shambhala teachings more and more, they emphasized proper culture, proper behavior, manners, the dressing well, dressing properly. And I think I've told you about the Yun expeditions that he used to take his students on, where they went looking for beautiful clothing or objects that were of beauty, which you see with the eye of prajna, which you see with this clarity. In fact, the whole world can become very beautiful with the eye of prajna, vivid, luminous, because it's no longer obscured by these anxious, fearful, hopeful stories. He says you learn how to be good at doing things purely by paying attention to reality. You learn how to be good at tying your shoes and how driving your car, all kinds of things. Being an artist. Then we have a little hiccup here, prajna that transcends worldliness. And here, this is just simply the intelligence that allows us to study the Dharma, to listen to these teachings, to understand the instructions that we're given on how to meditate and practice. And this is the prajna that transcends worldliness. You see, prajna is intelligence. It's the ultimate intelligence. It's clear intelligence. It's not that it's not the intelligence that can necessarily, solve the problem. What's 17 times 28? That's thinking mind. Or, what's the meaning of the Magna Carta and what date was it signed? This thinking mind, thinking you learn. But all of that is contained within prajna nonetheless. Prajna is the clear, effortless knowingness that we all have. It's our fundamental nature. And finally, we come to the prajna that transcends dharmas. This is the third type, and this is the one that really is the Dharma, is the teachings. It's superior prajna. And when he talks about dharmas, what he's talking about, when he uses the word dharmas, he's talking about the phenomena. Remember the 6 types of phenomena: sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, objects of mind. All of these are happening like these words. These are phenomena coming out. Prajna sees them clearly. It distinguishes them one from the next clearly, because we're not lost in dream. If you're lost in dream, you might miss some of these words. You might have an idea about who this person is sitting in this computer screen here talking to you, and have judgments and get lost in those judgments. But when you come back, as we all do, you come back to this clarity that sees exactly what's going on and can appreciate it for what it is. And you realize that all of this that's arising now has no origin and no cessation. There's just a continual flow, a continual arising and passing away. And you can't even find what it was that arose and passed. because it's already arisen and gone. He says, you begin to realize that there is nothing to hang on to, nothing to dwell on. We just sit here enjoying this constant display, as though we were watching a program on TV, mirages in the desert, reflections in mirror. You are not lost in nowhere, but you are unable to dwell or to label yourself. If you say, I am Joe Schmidt, where is this Joe Schmidt? It's just a name. Joe Schmidt, you like that one. Instead of John Smith. Is he the name of the form, the feeling, the concept, the name of any of the skandhas? Is he the name of this? This was born without a name. It's going to die and turn into dust without a name. The name is just a label. It's as though we take a piece of paper, write the label Joe Schmidt on a piece of paper, and scotch tape it to my shoulder. Pardon the delay. We've got terrible internet here. So he says, what was Joe Schmidt in the past? Who is he in the present? Who will he be in the future? I am no one. The name was just a name that was given to us by our parents because they liked it. And we are just what we are, arising and passing in this moment. He says you begin to wonder whether you exist or not. Now, exist means have endurance over time, have a particular identity, be unitary, be one thing. When in fact, what we are right now, in this present moment, is a participation in all of these phenomena. We are the space around us as our arms move through it in slow motion because of my computer lag. He says, there is nothing that you personally can pinpoint as I am, yet a general sense of cognition occurs. Cognition is happening all the time. It's unstoppable. It's clear light. It is brilliant. It is light shining through. Right now, we're all experiencing this. Beyond that cognition or basic consciousness, there is nothing at all. This is all there is. The rest of it is dream. The dream of the past, the dream of the future. It's useful, in a way, to know that the future is contained in this present moment. I mean, this class will end and we'll all do something else, go to bed, get up tomorrow morning. But yet, this class, it has no true substance. It's a constant appearing and disappearing. He says, there is a sense that when you sit and meditate and follow your breath, you find that there is actually no one doing that, yet there is the process taking place. This is a description of coming completely into the present moment with whatever you're doing. In this case, meditating and following your breath. You might timidly come back to your name, he says, thinking that this is who is speaking. John Baker, Joe Schmidt, Mary Smith. But beyond the name that was given to you, that your parents made up, nothing really exists. That is ultimate prajna. It is the discovery of egolessness, which frees you from fixation on I and other. I had, much long gone now, a relative named Carrie Ferguson. That was her name. I knew her as a child. She was introduced to me as my aunt. But I'm Jewish. Go figure. How do I get an aunt with the name Carrie Ferguson? Born that way. That was her given name. The story goes that her antecedent, her predecessor, or whatever, ancestor, arrived in America and was going through the procedure at Ellis Island. And somebody said to him, "What's your name?" While he was waiting in line. And he said, his name is Traeger. Traeger's a good Jewish name. It means porter. Jews in Germany were given names that meant something. For a long time, they weren't allowed to have names. That's interesting. And then they were given names that meant things like Stein means stone, Rosenblum means rose flower, so forth. So his name was Traeger because his family, I guess, were porters. And the guy said, "Oh, that's not a good name. You need an American name." So they came up with some kind of a name that they decided was an American name. Then he gets to the official. This is the story, this family story. And he tells the official says to him, "What's your name?" He couldn't remember the American name that he'd gotten. And he said in German Yiddish, ich hab vergessen, meaning I've forgotten in German. Ferguson. He became Ferguson. There is a name. That's names. That's the way we name ourselves. Ich hab vergessen. Did it matter? He was the same guy. Went on and lived a life. Had children. So it's talking about how the fact that there is no substantial me. It's just like what you're looking at on your computer screen. It's a constantly changing presentation of qualities, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, bodily sensations, and thoughts, mental events, emotions. And it's in the moment. The rest of it is fiction. It can be useful, maybe. I remember in the early days hearing Trungpa Rinpoche, very early, 1970, give a talk about this very subject, egolessness. During the Q&A after the talk, I was sitting in the second or third row, and I raised my hand and I said, doesn't ego sort of exist in a useful kind of way, provisionally, to help us sign our checks and pay bills and find our directions? He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes bulging out of his head, and shouted at me, "Ego is a lie!" A lie. So he talks now about the twofold egolessness, the two veils and the twofold egolessness. The twofold egolessness is that there is no I and there is no other. And the two veils are the veils of primitive beliefs about reality and conflicting emotions. So this basic idea of this is really, once you begin to get the idea of what Prajña is, which is beyond ego altogether, then you begin to realize that there are two fundamental mistakes that we make. The fundamental mistake is about me, that I have an ongoing existence. And that I'm unique, I'm solitary, I'm one thing. And I'm independent of anything else, fundamentally. When in fact, I'm not one thing, I'm made up of multiple parts. I'm even all the stuff around me, when you think about it. On my chair that I sit on, everything is within the realm of this experience of me. And not only that, but I'm dependent on everything. I'm dependent on this air, on you that I'm talking to, on my chair to sit on, my clothes. I'm a constant concatenation, never changing, never coming apart and coming back together. So this is the idea of egolessness. But the thing is, as soon as we believe in I, then that implies that there's something out there to relate to, other. And that exists. One way this is described is it's said that we're sitting here in space, egoless. And suddenly, magically, how does this happen? This birth of ignorance, this birth of misunderstanding. They say that one way to describe it is that in the middle of this space, suddenly something emerges as a figure, and all else recedes into ground. It's as though we're looking at a bird. I mean, Rinpoche once taught this and more at CU, and he went up to a blackboard and he picked up a piece of chalk and he drew a stick figure of a bird on the blackboard. He had a bunch of sleepy CU students sitting there. And he said, "What's this a picture of?" And the student said, finally, nobody wanted to answer, "It's a picture of a bird." He said, "It's a picture of the sky. We're sitting in the midst of the sky. There are birds, yes, but we tend to focus on something and make it the figure, and all else recedes into relative unimportance and becomes the ground. When that happens, that figure implies the existence of a perceiver, me. And suddenly we have this twofold split of other and the I that perceives it. If you go and try and find that I, well then, as soon as you see it, who's seeing it? Another I. It's an infinite recession. You can't find I. You can't find your own eyeball, as it were. It recedes back and back and back. And if you try and look at it, then who's doing the looking? It's kind of like Zeno's paradox. Zeno was a Greek philosopher who said, if you fire an arrow at a target, it never arrives because it always goes half the remaining distance. That was a Greek paradox. Well, this is, if you try and find I, who's looking? And if you try and find that person, there's another one behind that, and behind that. And it goes on forever. But we think that's there, therefore I am here. And if I'm here, well, then what's my relationship to that out there? This is the way the skandhas develop. The whole thing of ego begins to build. Because once we've got I and other, then you want to know, is that other for me, against me, or indifferent? Got three poisons. That's the second skandha, feelings. And so it goes on from there. This is the subject of another talk. How ego builds and becomes very complicated. But it's all based on that fundamental mistake. And in fact, the word for that mistake is in Sanskrit, avidya. In Tibetan, ma-rikpa. And what they both mean is the same thing, not seeing. This is the word that's usually translated as fundamental ignorance. But really, literally, it means not seeing. Not seeing what? Not seeing the ground. We are only looking at the figure. And if that figure is there, if that bird is there, I'm here watching it. So this is the way that ignorance is born in confusion. And we develop the whole five skandhas and the whole mess of this belief in I, the seer of the object, I and other. And this is what's meant when he talks about the twofold egolessness is cut through by the sword of Prajna, because Prajna stops the story of I and other. It's a story. And it cuts through to this clear awareness that we're sitting in right now, that's always with us. And then the other two veils that it also cuts through of conflicting emotions and primitive beliefs about reality. Well, primitive beliefs about reality, we're back to the I and other. We believe that I exist and other exists. And as long as we believe that, we get the second veil, which is this conflicting relationship in the story of how I am relating to other. My lover, my job, my death, my health, whatever it might be. I and all these things. And that's the veil of conflicting emotions. And the sword of Prajna cuts through it. The sword of Prajna is wielded by the Bodhisattva, Manjushri. who is the Bodhisattva of wisdom. He holds the sword in his right hand. It's a two-edged sword. Two edges because it cuts through those two beliefs, I and other, because it cuts through the two veils of primitive beliefs about reality and conflicting emotions. Manjushri is a very peaceful-looking deity. Wish I could show you. Alejandro discovered an image of the wrathful version of Manjushri. His name is Yamantaka. Let's see if I can get him. Hold on a second. I think I can. Yeah, here we go. We're going to see the wrathful aspect. See Manjushri in his wrathful aspect. He gets wrathful because wisdom needs to do a real job on ego. So here is a statue that Alejandro sent me of a deity whose name in Sanskrit is Vajra Bhairava. In Tibetan, it's Yamantaka. And I'm going to share this with you. Here's the wisdom in its wrathful aspect. It has to be wrathful because it's cutting through the worst of ignorance. And here we go. There he is. Doesn't get too much more wrathful than that. He's wearing the head of a bull, which symbolizes ignorance. And he's wearing this bull symbolizing ignorance because he's wisdom that's so extreme that it wears the head of ignorance in mockery. At the top there, you can see a little teeny head. That's Manjushri, the peaceful aspect of wisdom. He's got a gazillion arms because he's very, very skillful at dealing with the phenomenal world. And it's not in this picture, but he's standing over the figure of Yama. Yama is death. Yama holds the wheel of life. You know, when you see the wheel of life, he's that demon with the fangs, and he's holding the wheel because he's death. And when we die, if we're not enlightened, we're subject to the rule of Yama. Yamantaka conquers Yama. And what is Yamantaka? He is this wisdom of Prajña. Total, clear, cutting through ignorance. Not a great image? Thank you, Alejandro. Lodro, excuse me. So he says, you've developed numerous systems of that and this. It is like setting up an echo chamber. That and this are all the stories we tell ourselves about how, I was traumatized in my past, and I can't stop having, these traumatic remembrances that come back and plague me and make me miserable. Me, I. That constant story about this. Oh, Lodro says that statue is over 5 feet tall. I think he's saying it's breathtaking. It's a beauty. That figure is one of what's called the 8 Haruka Logos. And when you become a tantric practitioner, in the Nyingma scheme, there are 6 steps, 6 different yanas, you might say. And the 4th is called Mahayoga Yana. And it has 8 figures like that, each representing a different aspect of wisdom conquering ego. That's got to be one of my favorites of those 8. So, he says these schemes of this and that, the stories we tell ourselves, are more solid. Schemes are than a simple this and that. Schemes are our defense mechanism, the ego's defense mechanism. That's why bodhisattvas of the highest level still have to overcome the scheming, which is the last stain of ego. And then he uses the analogy of an empty bottle of perfume, of musk. What this is referring to is this. that as we progress along the path, we begin to discover what we're discussing here tonight more and more. But the problem is that then we try to hold on to that, to self-aggrandize that, as though we're going to get somewhere, as though we're going to accomplish something, as though we're going to become something better, more than we already are, which is not the case. And in doing that, we recreate ego. Now, as you progress along the Bodhisattva path and you begin to understand all these teachings more and more, and you begin to practice Prajña more and more, this gets thinner and thinner, this self-aggrandizement, this co-opting of spirituality, like I'm going to become a Buddha. It gets thinner and thinner until the 10th stage of the Bodhisattva path, when it's finally overcome and the practitioner experiences complete enlightenment. They liken this. You see, this is what we're beginning to understand, is we're understanding shunyata, the absence of I and other, the absence of concretization, the freedom from that. And we appreciate it tremendously as we begin to get it, even an inkling of it. And then as it grows, it brings joy, it brings delight, it brings freedom. Freedom from these terrible stories we've been telling ourselves. But the problem is, we sit back and we begin to appreciate that freedom. We say, oh, I'm discovering shunyata. It's getting better and better, which is another form of ego, subtler, but still there. And so they say that they use the analogy, they say it's like you've got a bottle of perfume. The perfume was confusion, musk. And the bottle has been emptied. The musk, the perfusion is no longer there, the confusion. But when you hold that empty bottle to your nose, you still smell the fragrance of confusion. And that's what happens when you begin to hold emptiness to your nose, as it were, when you appreciate this freedom from concept, from story. You appreciate it in contrast to the pain of the confusion. So it's still there. We're still self-aggrandizing subtly until finally one goes beyond that altogether, achieves complete enlightenment, and realizes Buddha nature altogether. He says, the original logic of I and other is not all that solid, but together the two create this world of confusion and suffering, which becomes more and more solid. That solidity, the solidity of confusion, is more like having a thick skin than having an actual solid body. I think that's a really wonderful, evocative analogy. So the first prajna, he says, first prajna sees through the ego of self, which does not actually exist. And beyond that, the ego of self tries to find its mythical mate known as the other. Then you and your mate go on to the ego of dharmas. The ego of dharmas is the ego of other. That exists out there. That doesn't exist any more than this does. It's just another name that we give to things. Everything is changing. He says, you and your mate begin to name everything, one thing after another. That is how you build the whole world of confusion. And it is prajna that actually cuts through that particular situation. This simple awareness that we practice especially when we start our meditation, it's right there, clear, limpid, effortless. He says the previous paramitas might still leave some reference point of I and other, but prajna cuts through the whole thing. He says this, with prajna, the idea of you practicing the dharma, and gaining results. With prajna, it's seen as hocus pocus. Prajna says, no, you cannot attain anything or gain anything because you do not have it or you at all. This makes you see things in an entirely new light. The new light is Buddha nature, that it's already here. And then the egolessness of prajna is good background for practicing the rest of the paramitas. If you practice them without a doer and a done, an I and an other, they become truly transcendent. For example, generosity without giver and receiver, without I and other. And the same for all of them. And struggles, he says, through Prajna Paramita, you begin to experience a larger world. It's the world beyond these stories that we've told ourselves and about our world. It's very limited, the world that we live in with ego. And these struggles of I and other just become little ripples in the water. In fact, eventually anyhow, they go away completely. Finally, you realize that all existence is insubstantial, fundamentally, just a constant, diaphanous appearing. Not just impermanent, but things are always impermanent, insubstantial. The Mahayana is known as the greatest vehicle because it does not try to cling to any primitive belief in solidity. He says, with Prajna Paramita, you're not going to stay good old Joe. We're talking about the last section here. Good old Joe or Mary Schmidt, but you are going to transform, go beyond, become something different, because we're giving up these self-defining, literally ego-defining stories that we've been carrying around and torturing ourselves with. Really, even when they're happy. They're a form of self-torture. Someone asked him once, I could say this again and again, what's the purpose of fear? And he said, to prove that I exist. What's the purpose of unhappiness and sorrow? To prove that I exist. Same thing. He says, you're not trying to change into something else, because this is, right now, egolessness and shunyata. Just keeps saying the same thing again and again. He says, when there is no looker, no searcher, everything is fluid. Seen, experienced, understood, and realized. This is prajna. Everything is seen, experienced, understood, and realized because there's no looker or no searcher. That is the basic and very primitive explanation of prajna. And I wrote down to myself, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. Remember our dedication of merit? May all obtain omniscience. This is what it's saying. When there is no looker and no searcher, everything is seen, experienced, understood, and realized. This is the meaning of that line. May all obtain omniscience. And then finally he ends, when you cut through your primitive beliefs about reality, your conflicting emotions, there is compassion. Emotions are very aggressive. You know, they always have to do with protecting this I or getting something for this I. So to cut through them, you need the sword of Prajna, So prajna is automatically linked with compassion, because when you cut through ego and its constant manipulation of I and other, constant self-aggrandizement and manipulation of the world, then there is true appreciation for whatever is arising in this present moment, with heart, with beauty, with appropriate response. And so compassion is revealed. Compassion and prajna go together. They're two sides of the same coin. So we could have I'm sorry, Michael.
Okay, well, John's talk was so excellent and covered everything that I was joking earlier that I'm used to being the leadoff man, not batting cleanup, but the bases are empty, which is a good way to describe Shunyata, I guess. I think John's talk was excellent and really covered all the main points. Just a couple of things that I'd thought about and contemplated over the past week, mainly in regard to a couple of the questions that came up last week. But I think in terms of the two veils that we talked about, conflicting emotions and primitive beliefs, we generally have a sense of how conflicting emotions are a problem for us, at least after the fact. We regret, at least after the fact, times when we're aggressive or grasping or ignorant. But I think we tend to be less clear on the nature of the veil of primitive beliefs. And with that, I think it's important to understand something of conceptual mind and to see how prajna cuts through conceptual mind. Sometime in the last year of Zoom meetings, I saw a biographical movie about Alan Watts, who in the 50s and 60s really popularized Zen Buddhism in the United States, or helped with that anyway. And he made an interesting statement in the movie. He said that the conceptual mind is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. And what happens is anytime we take ourselves to be real, exactly as John described, we believe in a self that's permanent, singular or unitary, and independent. And anytime we attribute the same kind of existence to things around us or to people around us and see them as just solid things, unchanging, independent, then we're giving in to primitive beliefs in eternalism. And this is the beginning of, in regard to the ego of self, ego of individuality, where we begin to go awry and begin to experience all kinds of difficulties. So beginning to understand the ways in which conceptual mind that solidifies, mind that attributes existence, solidity, and reality to things, understanding how that works and how we experience it in the moment is really important. It's important to understand how that happens here and now for us, not as something out there that we conceptually understand, but to actually see how that develops. And in the beginning, I think most often we tend to recognize it after the fact. We realize that we went too far, that we held on to something in a way that we didn't need to hold on to it. The problems with the conceptual mind are that we tend to mistake concept for experience. And also that our concepts tend to create experience. And this is even recognized to some degree in Western psychology. There's a whole notion of confirmation bias, that an idea we have shapes how we see the world, that we look for evidence that supports our idea and ignore the things that don't. So it's not that this reaches the level of some understanding of egolessness, but we at least can see how the conceptual mind run awry creates problems for us. And the whole point of understanding prajna, of developing prajna, of recognizing prajna, and more as I understand the Mahayana and the Vajrayana, I really see that it comes down to exactly that, recognizing, which is why meditation is so important, because it allows us to settle the mind and stabilize our clarity so that we are able to recognize. Recognizing when we've attributed solidity, existence, reality to things and begin to hold on to that. When we create the whole system of reference points that Trungpa Rinpoche talked about in the chapter, that's when primitive beliefs about reality are really having an impact on us. And prajna frees us from that. Prajna, this knowing, inquisitive quality of mind, ultimately is freedom. Because it cuts through all of that, as he says. There's no bias, there's no process, no processor. We cut through, let go of all of that. So I would say this chapter on prajna really summarizes the summation of a lot of the things that we've studied so far. So one of the questions that I think that came up last week was about, and again, this is my understanding and my memory, so I'm probably not exactly able to state exactly what the question was, but it was along the lines of, if nothing exists, if nothing's real, why do we care about things? Or how, or does this negate any possibility of action in the world? And the answer to that is that there again, what we're stuck in when we see the world that way, that nothing matters, that everything's merely a point of view or relative, then we're stuck in a view. We're stuck in a concept. It's not true emptiness. As a matter of fact, Dzigar Konkrel says exactly that emptiness without compassion is conceptual negation. And when we get stuck in that kind of view, it actually becomes reinforcing of ego, because it gives us a way to shut out the world around us. The whole idea of shunyata is not that nothing exists. It's just that it doesn't exist in the way that we believe it does. And in my own experience studying this material, I always find it kind of elusive, even though it talks about elusive, but elusive in the sense that it's hard to hold on to, because ultimately shunyata is beyond any concept. We can come up with things that kind of describe maybe things around the edges of it, but ultimately a true experience of shunyata, true experience of egolessness, is beyond any concept, beyond anything we can hold on to. And when we find ourselves holding on to something, when we realize that that's what we're doing, then we realize we need to let go. And letting go is not ignoring or giving up. It's just simply seeing things as they are, which is ultimately what prajna is all about. So it's not a question of not being able to care about things in the world, but it's a question of being able to care about things in the world with discrimination, precision, and accuracy, and without attributing some kind of reality to things that is not really existent. And also being able to relate to things without the conflicting emotions. It's one of my, one of the things I struggle with in terms of politics, because I see so much of politics involving the inciting of negative emotions to try to generate action. And I just don't, in my experience, anger, resentment, paranoia, fear, don't lead to any kind of skillful action at all. They just perpetuate suffering. And so truly skillful action comes from something beyond some kind of solidification of self and other, which is ultimately what prajna leads to. There was also some question about the connection between compassion and prajna, which actually Trungpa Rinpoche got to at the end of this talk tonight. So I did a little bit of reading about that, and it's said in the Mahayana that compassion is, that there's two ways of understanding the importance of compassion, at least two ways, I should say, of understanding compassion in the Mahayana. One is that the experience of compassion loosens fixation. And we actually did talk about this back in the chapter on cutting ego fixation, where Trungpa Rinpoche talks about reversing the logic of ego, where we put ourselves first, and everything we experience is experienced in terms of, what does this mean to me? Is this a threat to me? Is this something I want to hold on to? And instead begin to develop more awareness of other and more ability to at least see others as at least equal to ourselves, if not being able to, as bodhisattvas, being able to put others before ourselves. And that this reverses the logic of ego. It loosens all of the fixation that ego is based on. And then the other aspect of compassion, so that's more of a path aspect of compassion. The other aspect of compassion that relates to emptiness, which also involves letting go of fixation, is that compassion is as close as we can get, it's said, to the true nature of mind, and that it's an inherent quality of mind. And Trungpa Rinpoche actually talked about exactly this in the chapter we read on basic goodness. There's a whole section in there actually on the Alaya nature, and how basically on that level there's no bias toward anything, which is another way of understanding the cutting through twofold ego, so that there's no attachment either way, either to self or to any view of other. Again, I would just say that in my reading about prajna and shunyata and emptiness, I found that it's worth reading and rereading, because there's always something that I understand in a different way. And every time I think I understand it, that's almost surely a sign that something's being left out. So that it's good to go back. And we had a whole section in this book on emptiness and compassion that really goes through all the Madhyamaka logic and the Yogacara logic, mind only, in a very experiential way. And it's worth reading and rereading. And so I think I'll just end by the line at one of the lines at the end of the book, where Trungpa Rinpoche says that, at the end of this chapter, I mean, where Trungpa Rinpoche says that according to Nagarjuna and Madhyamaka logic, if you do not claim anything, you're victorious. And what that means is not claiming anything means not asserting any kind of existence, and not asserting any kind of nothingness, non-existence either. Being able to understand both how things appear, so we can't say they don't exist, and at the same time, they don't have any real substance, they don't have any real identity, they don't have any real solidity. So that, as I understand it, any true experience of shunyata cuts through any kind of fixed view, any kind of concept. And that's why the experience of prajna, which is what recognizes shunyata, is complete freedom and complete liberation. Thank you.
So we can have comments, questions and answer.
Lodro.
Not asserting anything, you're victorious. That feels like a Lo Young slogan, actually, which I'm really looking forward to. That was so beautiful. Thank you so much to John and to Michael. This class just really touched me in so many levels. And the mention of, it was interesting to hear that through the understanding of shunyata and through applying prajna to understand emptiness, one does not become someone else, but actually John worded it as something else. And that just really resonated with me. I think it locks the point even further. And that element of how much do we get lost in this storyline, like the novels that we read or the movies that we watch, what were these heroes and heroines? It reminded me of how I like to perceive prajna, or that dichotomy of I and other. I always perceive it as if watching something really close, for example, my finger, I'm putting it really close to my eyes. If I really get immersed in the thing, it breaks down into two. And one finger just all of a sudden now becomes two blurry images. And that's how I perceive I and other. I cannot see it clearly. I can't see the nail or the joints or the like, but there's these two blurry images. And what I like about that sense of distance, or that sense of not getting lost or so involved in the storyline, is like one more time just taking some distance, and now it can be perceived with a bit more clarity. So I think the emphasis on both Shunyata, the connection of Shunyata, Prajna, and how they relate to I and other was just really, really profound. So just expressing so much gratitude for tonight. Thank you.
I have a question. If I can understand not being able to pinpoint the self or the I, and that the enduring, indivisible, independent self, I can conceive of dropping that. And that it doesn't really truly exist, and I can't pinpoint what it is or where it comes from, the self. But I can't conceive of not having a first person experience, a subjective first person experience of I am conscious, I am aware. As a matter of fact, it's one of the things I'm really only sure of, that I am consciousness and I am experiencing and I am awareing, or I am perceiving, or whatever. So I guess what I'm asking is does this mean you get rid of a subjective first person experience? Can you have the I without having the other?
Like, you get rid of the I. There's just awareness.
I can't conceive of not having a subjective first person experience.
If I could jump in for a second there, I think, Dan, as Barry said, in meditation, even if only for a fraction of a second, when you are sitting and you are being aware, I think that you can not be obsessed, or not be focused on the I that is being aware, but on just the being. I don't know if that helps, but I think that you can experience things without an I, even if only briefly.
Sure, and if I could just jump in too. In the teachings, there are several examples of that are given, and what comes to my mind are things like sneezing, sexual climax that's experienced without the ego, that we've all experienced for an instant or two. We know that already.
Those are two of the classic examples of when thought stops. I think there are how many? 4 or 5. One is sneezing, one is sexual orgasm, one is a sudden shock. Anybody remember the others? But it doesn't really matter that thoughts stop. What this is saying is that the I is just a story that occurs from time to time, and that what is going on all the time is eyeless prajna, this intelligence that is capable of perceiving through the 5 senses and mind, is unstoppable clarity. And then I arises as a question, as an assertion, as a creation, you might say, that is only temporary. I think this is a good idea. I don't think I understand this, and then it's gone. Meanwhile, the intelligence never is gone. That clarity of prajna is always with us. What arises momentarily is a form of self-doubt and then its corollary, self-affirmation. And so we're being asked really to switch our allegiance, again, that phrase, our loyalty, from the I stories that we tell ourselves, which are very, very repetitive and idiosyncratic to each one of us, from that to this open, clear, eyeless awareness, which is giving up a tremendous amount of reference point, you might say. The reference
I understand how the I understand how the I in creating the other is a problem. But is it do you think it's possible to have an I without the other, without a separation between you and the other?
No, I don't. I think they absolutely go together.
That's the whole idea of being singular. There's some sort of separation between whatever we take to be I and whatever else we say is not I. But I don't know if this will help or not. In some ways, I think maybe it's almost like just working with the question is actually the best prajna way to deal with it. But just to throw something out, sort of like what we talked about a little bit last week when he talked about storing our perceptions. So we can have a perception of things and just experience something without having to grasp or possess and then further elaborate on, with judgments and everything, the perception. So that it's not that experience stops, but we don't relate to it, with the sense of grasping something as if it were real. We just it's just a process, just the experience. So, and I think even our internal experience is that way. Well, of course, if you say internal, that implies external, which gets back to I and other. But even what we take to be an internal experience, let's put it that way, on the level of, that first moment of awareness is, there is no I, there's just the experience.
I have maybe a really simplistic way that I relate to this. It's like if you took the structure of a sentence and you said something like just the verb, like jumping, and you feel what that feels like, and then you add in a subject, I am jumping, it feels different. Their experience is there, but you've added something to the experience, the I am.
I understand conceptualizing about what the I is, and I understand that being diminished, but the feeling is still a first person subjective feeling.
Maybe this is a language thing.
Maybe.
But yeah, when you're jumping, that's you have that experience. But when you say I am, to me, it feels like there's an element of a watcher now saying, this is what I'm doing. It's a great question. Like Michael said, great for us all to ponder.
Mm-hmm.
I'd just like to say very quickly, one thing about it is, Dan, when you first were talking about this, you said you can't conceive of this. Well, actually, it's not something that you can really conceive of. It's something that you can experience mainly through meditation.
It's good. I'm grappling with it, and that's what this is about. And it's I mean, the consciousness is just one of the biggest mysteries in whatever, in the Buddhaverse, right?
Jane. We can't hear you, Jane.
So on the bottom of page 264, the last paragraph, Prajna that transcends dharmas, he talks about Joe Schmidt and says, you begin to wonder, this is, I think, what Dan is talking about. You begin to wonder whether you exist or not. That is the state of egolessness. He goes on, there is nothing that you personally can actually pinpoint as I am, yet a general sense of cognition occurs. Cognition is like clear light, it is brilliant light shining through. Beyond that cognition or basic consciousness, there is nothing at all. And then he goes on, the last sentence says, yet there is a process taking place. So I'm trying to understand this. So if I have a concept of myself that is mother, it's not I, it's mother. And of course, mother implies a relationship and a process. Is that being egolessness, not having ego, when the concept and the process is one? I see it in relationship. I can't be a mother or have the concept of mother without being in relationship. Is that getting me a little bit closer to this idea of prajna? I'm really struggling with it. I'm finding it's very difficult to wrap my arms around.
John, you're muted.
I think that he's drawing the distinction between this clear, natural state of knowingness, which is with us all the time, and which is contentless. It doesn't tell any stories. And on the other hand, there is the story of being a mother. And that implies a whole history that we remember in thought, as well as a future that we project in thought. Meanwhile, the actual reality in the moment goes on in clarity. Now, the question is, where are we putting our loyalty? Because if you put it in the whole definition of me being a mother, it can get very fraught with all kinds of expectation, unhappiness, happiness, plans for the future, stories about the past. We all carry these stories around with us one way or another. I'm a father, scholar, Buddhist, businessman, male, whatever it might be. And these words, these labels, are accurate as far as they go, but they're just that, labels. Meanwhile, we're living, each one of us, the life that we have. They talk in the Tantras, when we get...
You muted yourself. You muted, John.
Sorry, I didn't know how I did that. When we get to the Tantras, we're going to be talking about Buddha nature. And that is that each one of us has qualities which are real, which express themselves in the present moment. You have the femininity, I have masculinity, your hair is brown, mine is blonde, whatever it might be. We all have these qualities that go on. You're a mother, I'm a father. But these are labels. And meanwhile, what it's directing us back to is the immediacy of this clear, effortless knowingness, which contains within it a tremendous heart and respect for what is arising now. As soon as we get caught up in the past and the future, that respect and heart is vastly diminished. Because now we're working with echoes. Who else? It's great, this discussion. I'm not Kim, Randy.
Hi, John. Thank you so much. And thank you to Michael, everyone else. In the beginning, you were talking about elegance and arrogance. And I would like to hear your explanation of the arrogant aspect of Prajna.
This could be a group effort. I think the arrogant aspect is that it doesn't cavil to fear, to the fear of concept and the stories that we tell ourselves about what's going to happen to me. Will my children love me? You know, am I going to be a good parent? Am I going to be a loved parent? That's one story that we as parents have. I mean, but there's so many, an infinite number of them. And Prajna is beyond that. It's just clear knowingness.
It's the fierceness of the warrior, that type of aspect.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's why it's a sword.
Mm-hmm.
Two-edged sword.
But it's not the Punjab or not the Punjab. What's it called? The
Trishula.
the one that
Purva?
Purva, or what's it?
Purva.
Yeah. Isn't that more powerful than the two-edged sword?
No. Just another symbol for another way of, I mean, here we go. I thought I had my Purva here, but I don't. It's a three-edged knife, and it's just another symbol for cutting through ego. It's got three blades. You know, there's triangular, because it cuts through the three poisons in the heart of ego: passion, aggression, and stupidity. The Purva does. Yeah. It's a great symbol, the Purva. It's very tantric. Whereas the two-bladed sword of Manjushri is much more Mahayana. We'll get to that too.
It might be easier to think of it in terms of confidence, but when you get to that level of like the Yamantaka statue that John showed us, it's wrathful. It's complete clarity and complete confidence in the knowing quality of Prajna. So I guess, yeah, you could call it arrogance in the sense that it's uncompromising.
Yeah. Positive arrogance, without being neurotic. The arrogance of wisdom and enlightenment.
And that comes partly from not being attached to any particular point of view.
Right. I guess this is good. Lodro asks in the chat.
You went mute
You
again.
muted again.
Not just-
Yeah, Lodro asked a question in chat. Is arrogance connected to Ziji? And which is confidence. And it sounds to me like it is. It's this utter clarity of mind that knows no doubt and no fear, because it's what we are. It's not willed. It's not my possession. It's happening all the time, unstoppably, right now. Where's the statue, Ed? We showed it earlier. I'd have to go and find it again and put it into share screen. It's a statue of Yamantaka. You can just Google Yamantaka and Yamantaka.
I would love to have a copy of that image. I did Google it and I couldn't find that one. That's a humdinger.
Okay, I'll send it out.
Because I actually took it in the Rubin Museum 2 weeks ago.
Ah.
And it's 5 feet high. That's a big one.
It was amazing. It was an exhibition on the 6th room that was available until the beginning of January, so they actually took it out. But it was just such an amazing picture. I was just going through the 6th floor and I was just so taken aback that I had to take that picture. And I shared it with John and I think it came out nice, right?
We're just about out of time here.
Yeah, I think we probably should end. Yeah, or we are out of time. So should we do the dedication of merit? Michael, you want to put it up? Or?
Okay.
And then we have discussion group tomorrow. We can talk about it some more. And
Here we go. I muted everyone. Can people mute themselves? By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, John.
Profound
Bye.
gratitude, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
See you tomorrow.
That's the until tomorrow. Sleep well, everybody. Sleep well. Hello, baby. You want to come sleep? Come. Here, come here. Come on.